11.4. Perform quantitative risk analysis. Perform quantitative risk analysis is a process of numerically analysing the combined effect of identified individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty on overall project objectives. The key benefit of this process is that it quantifies overall project risk exposure, and it can also provide additional qualitative risk information to support risk response planning. This process is not required for every project, but where it is used, it is performed throughout the project. And that's from PMBOK Guide page 4 to 8. The PMBOK Guide tells us that perform quantitative risk analysis is not required in all projects. However, I think it may be fairer to say that quantitative risk analysis is not used on most projects, and when it is only a few of the top risks that are quantified and not your entire risk register. One of the reasons is that most project managers put a lot of work into qualitative risk analysis, and I see little benefit in knowing the actual dollars and cents to a high degree of accuracy. One of the standard expressions in information technology is rubbish in, rubbish out, which means that a reliable output requires a reliable input. Therefore, embarking on quantitative risk analysis without taking the time and expense to ensure that the details on which you're basing your estimate are accurate, then you're just wasting time and money. A poor quantitative risk analysis is actually worse than not doing one, because not only have you wasted time and money, but you have introduced a major risk caused by people believing that your estimates are correct and then basing project decisions on them. It's a bit like on the internet, if someone sees something in print, they think this is true. How could it be false? It's on the internet. Quantitative risk analysis usually requires specialized risk software and expertise in the development and interpretation of risk models. It's important to remember that only your top risks need to be quantified. It would be impossible to justify analysing all of them. When you are performing risk management planning, you need to record if you will be using quantitative risk analysis, and if so, some indications of how you're going to select the risk to be quantified. A good place to start, and one which I normally use, is a Pareto chart, which uses the 80-20 rule to determine the estimated 20% of your risks that are likely to cause 80% of the problems. The PMBOK Guide says it is most likely appropriate for large or complex projects, strategically important projects, projects for which it is a contractual requirement, or projects in which a key stakeholder requires it. Please note for the exam that quantitative risk analysis is the only reliable method to assess overall project risk through evaluating the aggregated effect on project outcomes of all individual project risks and other risks of uncertainty. Project quantitative risk analysis uses information on individual project risks that have been assessed by the performed qualitative risk analysis process as having a significant potential to affect the project's objectives. Outputs from performed quantitative risk analysis are used as inputs to the planned risk responses process, particularly in recommending responses to the level of overall project risk and key individual risks. A quantitative risk analysis may also be undertaken following the planned risk response process to determine the likely effectiveness of planned responses in reducing overall project risk exposure. Perform quantitative risk analysis inputs. Number 1, project management plan. The components that we're interested in this process are the risk management plan, naturally enough. The risk management plan specifies whether quantitative risk analysis is required for the project. It also details the resources available for the analysis and the expected frequency of the analyses. Scope baseline. Do you remember what the scope baseline is? It's a combination of the agreed scope plus the work breakdown structure baseline plus the work breakdown structure dictionary baseline. The scope baseline describes the starting point from which the effect of individual project risks and their sources of uncertainty are evaluated. Schedule baseline, the cost baseline, all those baselines that should be used to evaluate the effects of the individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty against. Input number 2, project documents, which would include the assumptions log. The assumptions may arise from inputs to quantitative risk analysis if they're assessed by posing a risk to project objectives. Basis of estimates. The basis of estimates used in the planning of the project may be reflected in variability modelled during a quantitative risk analysis process. This may include information on the estimate's purpose, classification, assumed accuracy, methodology and source. Cost estimates, cost forecasts. Cost forecasts such as the project's estimate to completion, estimate at completion, budget at completion and to complete performance index may be compared to the results of the quantitative cost risk analysis to determine the confidence level associated with achieving these targets. Also the duration estimates, milestone list, resource requirements, the risk register. Risk register contains details of individual project risks to be used as input for the quantitative risk analysis. Risk report that describes sources of overall project risk and the current overall risk status. Schedule forecasts. These may be compared to the results of the quantitative schedule risk analysis to determine the confidence level associated with achieving these targets. Input number 3, enterprise environmental factors, would include industry studies of similar projects and published material, including commercial risk databases or checklists. Number 4 is the organizational process assets, and the ones that can influence or perform qualitative risk analysis process include information from similar completed projects. Project qualitative risk analysis tools and techniques. Number 1 is no prizes for guessing, it's expert judgment. And we're looking for individuals or groups with specialized knowledge or training in the following topics: performing quantitative risk analysis, mathematical calculations, naturally enough, knowledge of selecting and using risk modelling techniques, and interpreting the outputs of quantitative risk analysis. Tools and techniques. Number 2, data gathering. This is just interviews with experts to discuss the input to the analysis and compare with previous projects. Tools and techniques. Number 3, interpersonal team skills. Would really be facilitation. A skilled facilitator is useful for gathering data output during a dedicated risk workshop involving project team members and other stakeholders, and they can help keep people focused and help them progress in the right way and help them to produce useful information. Convergent information is what we call it rather than divergent. Tools and techniques. Number 4, representations of uncertainty. The quantitative risk analysis requires inputs to a quantitative risk analysis model that reflects individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty. Where the duration, cost or response requirements for a planned activity is uncertain, the range of possible values can be represented in the model as a probability distribution. And yes, you do have to know a little bit about statistics for the examination. This can take many forms. The most commonly used ones are triangular, normal, log normal, beta, uniform or discrete distributions, and I'm sure you are already thinking about those yourself because you've already read this chapter before I'm presenting it. That's why you read it. Where risks are related, for example, with a common cause or a logical dependency, then you need to take this correlation into consideration. For example, If the flow of coolant in a pipe is too low, it will cause a series of motors to fail. But the temperature of the coolant pump increases with coolant flow, and there is a risk of the coolant pump failing. If the coolant pump fails, it will trip the electrical overload circuit, but the overhead lights are on the same circuit and they will be switched off too, causing hazards for the operators who are working below. And so as you can see, these risks have to be treated as a system of interrelated risks rather than just an isolated risk. Tools and techniques number 5, data analysis. Techniques you can use would include simulation. In the exam, if it asks about the simulation method, the most likely answer is Monte Carlo method. Or if it asks a question about Monte Carlo method, then the likely answer is simulation. What is Monte Carlo, the country famous for a casino, got to do with project management? Monte Carlo is computer software which uses high numbers of repeated random samples or pseudo-random samples to obtain numerical results. If you are developing a project schedule using the CPM method, for example, Monte Carlo can generate thousands of possible start times for all activities and produce a range of possible critical paths instead of just one critical path. The modern version of Monte Carlo method was first developed in the 1930s to simulate card games, and that's why it's got the name Monte Carlo. But its first real application was in the 1940s when it was used to develop atomic bombs, would you believe it? And so you can use Monte Carlo to determine what risks and conditions are likely to make your project blow up. Monte Carlo analysis uses the project cost estimates for cost-risk simulation, and it uses a schedule network diagram and duration estimates to simulate schedule risk. An integrated quantitative cost schedule risk analysis uses both inputs. The output of a quantitative risk analysis model, the input values, e.g. the cost estimates, duration estimates, or occurrence of probabilistic branches are chosen at random by Monte Carlo for each iteration. Outputs represent the range of possible outcomes for the project, e.g. project end date, project cost to completion. Typical outputs include a histogram presenting the number of iterations where a particular outcome resulted from the simulation, or a cumulative probability distribution with S-curve, representing the probability of achieving that particular outcome or less. An example S-curve from a Monte Carlo cost-risk simulation is shown in figure 1113. For a quantitative schedule risk analysis, it's also possible to conduct a criticality analysis that determines which elements of the risk model have the greatest effect on the project critical path. The risks are displayed with the percentage likely impact. Also a sensitivity analysis. You can also perform sensitivity analysis by considering each risk in isolation. Decision tree analysis. This is used to support selection of the best of several alternate courses of action. Alternate paths through the project are shown in the decision tree using branches representing different decisions or events, each of which can have associated costs related individual project risks, including both threats and opportunities. The endpoints of branches in the decision tree represent the outcome from following that particular path, which can be negative or positive. The decision tree is evaluated by calculating the expected monetary value of each branch, allowing the optimal path to be selected. For example, a decision tree is shown in figure 1115. Please note that on each branch the probabilities must add up to 100%. On the diagram, each branch has two probabilities. Each one has a 60% plus a 40% probability, which equals 100%. You could actually have any number of branches and probabilities, but just on this particular diagram they've chosen two, and they've chosen the same 60-40 split for each. Those numbers could be anything as long as they add up to 100%. Influence diagrams. Influence diagrams are graphical aids to decision making under uncertainty. An influence diagram represents a project or a situation within a project as a set of uncertainties, outcomes and influences together with relationships and effects between them. Where an element in the influence diagram is uncertain as a result of the existence of individual project risks or other sources of uncertainty, this can be represented in the influence diagram using ranges or probability distributions. The influence diagram is then evaluated using a simulation technique such as Monte Carlo analysis to indicate which elements have the greatest influence on key outcomes. Outputs from other influence diagrams are similar to other quantitative risk analysis methods, including S-curves and tornado diagrams. And tornado diagrams are named just because at a glance they look like a tornado. Perform quantitative risk analysis outputs. Number 1, project document updates, and these would include the risk report. Typically, updates for the risk report would include assessment of overall project risk exposure. This is reflected in 2 key measures. That's important for the examination. First one, chances of project success, indicated by the probability that the project will achieve its key objectives. Example, required end date or interim milestones, required cost target, etc., given the identified individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty. And the second one is degree of inherent variability remaining within the project at the time the analysis was conducted, indicated by the range of possible project outcomes. You would expect the inherent variability to reduce to 0 as the project nears completion, because there can't be any variability when it's completed. Detailed probabilistic analysis of the project. Key outputs from the quantitative risk analysis are presented, such as S-curves, tornado diagrams, criticality analysis, together with a narrative interpretation of the results. Possible detailed results of a quantitative risk analysis may include amount of contingency reserve needed to provide a specified level of confidence. Contingency reserve is the amount of money and/or time set aside for the project manager to deal with risk treatments. Identification of individual project risks or other sources of uncertainty that have the greatest effect on project critical path, and major drivers of overall project risk with the greatest influence on uncertainty in project outcomes. Prioritize lists of individual project risks. This list includes those individual project risks that pose the greatest threats or present the greatest opportunity to the project, if we're thinking in positive terms, as indicated by sensitivity analysis. There's also the trends in quantitative risk analysis results. As the analysis is repeated at different times during the project life cycle, trends may become apparent that inform the planning of risk responses. Recommended risk responses. The risk report may present suggested responses to the level of overall project risk exposure or key individual project risks based on the results of the quantitative risk analysis. These recommendations will form inputs to the plan risk response process. And that brings us to the end of Perform Quantitative Risk Assessment, and the next lesson is 11.5, Plan Risk Responses. Please read the corresponding chapter in the pinboard guide before watching the video. You thought I was going to forget to say that, didn't you?